that don't have slots. So we're spending 100% state and county money with no federal money, housing them in the jails and the prison system. We're wasting money and essentially by not having no vacancy or slots in these programs. So we're wasting money because we don't have a place for them to go. We don't have the housing for them to go. Leon, you had some comments.
Just the studies have been out for a long time showing that the financial efficacy of permanent supportive housing for this population, as you mentioned, not only emergency medical and criminal justice, but public work savings. That I've never seen any locality sort of take those savings that they make the investment in order to look far enough forward to realize those savings after the fact. You know, there are great things happening like the criminal, veterans courts, diversion programs. San Francisco County has a veterans pod in the county jail where we provide direct services there and trying to get these folks up reentry that works for them. But I don't know of anyone who says, well, studies show that we'll save X amount of dollars by creating permanent supportive housing, so let's do it and take that money that would normally have been saved and send it to that.
How many vouchers are not being used in the state of California now? If you count all the housing vouchers for the veterans, how many vouchers? What's the value of all those vouchers that are not being used because we have no units available in their community for these rental subsidy vouchers? I think
So
there's a lot of
we have
vouchers out there.
We have 11,000, approximately 11. We have 11,111 HUD-VASH vouchers at present that are active in California, and the leased up rate right now is about 75% across California. So there are many more. I didn't quite do the math to figure that out, but there are many more that are issued. As I said, at the end of November, we had 2,000 veterans who had a voucher that were looking, and then many more are in the queue. And of course, veterans turn over the voucher, so some return
If you
the
count
voucher.
Section 8 housing and other kinds of vouchers, other rental subsidy programs, if you add all these vouchers up, because there's no place for people to use the vouchers, how many of them are there sitting around, you know, they're not being, that's money that's been allocated basically, but hasn't been used.
I haven't really heard of this phenomenon really happening with the regular housing choice voucher programs. I think most housing authorities, they over voucher.
We have Section 8 in my county. We have thousands that aren't being used.
Right, I think in the
Section 8 vouchers.
the counties that have very low vacancy rates,
Yeah.
the 75% rate is pretty consistent. I know in LA County, our housing authorities are leasing up at a rate of 75%, which is definitely very low for the nationwide lease up rate. So it is definitely concerning. And as several people mentioned, this program is really good in creating more apartments available that can be leased. But I think that continues to be a problem in Section 8 as well in a lot of our counties.
May I add one point to the Section 8? There are two types of the Section 8 vouchers. It's either sort of housing choice, where it goes to the individual and they can have choice and choose wherever they can find an apartment, or project base, where I think you heard earlier with First Community Housing, they just got 49 VASH vouchers project based. The project basing relies on the housing authority's willingness to project base their vouchers. And in many cases, there is not a willingness to project-based vouchers. And the only way an affordable housing developer can underwrite the VASH or the Section 8 is only if it's project-based. Otherwise, you can't count on that income coming in. So it becomes even more challenging to bring in the rental subsidies if your local jurisdiction's housing authority is unwilling to project-base.
If I may, there's also been a lot of resistance by HUD and the VA in what they call shelving the vouchers by dedicating them to a project-based setting. A project that we opened in San Francisco in 2012, which has 60 project-based VASH vouchers and 15 COC subsidies through the Shelter Plus Care program, it never would have been built. We never would have been able to attract the tax credit financing. We were able to get 9% there. If the city and county hadn't stepped in and given us an operating subsidy guarantee, we did not get the VASH letter dedicating the vouchers until after we had certificate of occupancy for the building. So it was just impossible that way. Possibility in the future is these 8,000 vouchers that I mentioned earlier. They're in talks with mid-level people at HUD and the VA, there is some willingness to allow those to go out to be shelved, as they call it. They don't want the vouchers issued and not be put into use. Pressure from Congress, even though it's short-sighted in many of these instances. So we're hopeful that this 8,000 vouchers, there will be a much more liberal project basing opportunity with those, depending on the housing authority.
It gets to the flexibility. And the reason why the housing authorities aren't unwilling is because administratively they get dinged when they shelve, because feds will ding them. So if we can get the feds and the state and the locals all aligned and get some flexibility, and some of it is like regulatory relief to allow these funding sources to work together, that Mia was right. We need to sometimes step back. I know we get the tendency to want to regulate things, but to allow the flexibility so that these funding sources can come together. In any affordable housing project, you're going to need capital, money to build the units, money to operate the units, or rental subsidies. And in the case of permanent supportive housing, you now need funding for services. But you have to understand, the money that we're using for VHP is capital money. Now, we've been a little creative by offering bigger loans so that we can kind of get to some of the operating expenses. But the money that we do not have is money to operate on a long-term basis affordable housing. We got to keep the lights on if the rents are not enough to pay to keep the lights on. Or you got to bring rental subsidies to be able to offset those operating expenses. And so we're missing some pieces, but if we have the ability to have some flexibility, we'll be able to marry some of these
Do you
resources.
allow the credit enhancements or gap financing use of the money that you allocate to projects? Are you allowing flexibility on how that money is used by a housing developer?
We gave some flexibility on the tranches.
Like if somebody says, well, I need a grant, I want to use it for this purpose, this credit kind of enhancement, you don't allow that?
I mean, there are definitely
A
limitations.
lot of developers want that kind of.
You know, I think, you know, we have, as, you know, Tia just mentioned, you know, we have, you know, allowed some additional creativity in the larger loan limits for the supportive housing for extremely low income folks in order to produce some of the, you know, operating costs that are needed to continue the sustainability of that capital investment. But outside of that, I mean, we have pretty significant limitations on what we can use the funding for.
Why do you have that significant limitation? Is it a legal issue or
Bond money.
Bond money.
bond? Bond actually restricts that? Bonds itself restricts that? So if we had a piece of legislation that allowed more flexibility, how do we do that?
When you issue bonds, it's for capital. And so that's why you have the lacking in funding for operating or rental subsidies. That's a general fund kind of cost.
If I could add, I was involved in the drafting of the legislation, and the original legislation did include money for services operating and capital.
Credit enhancements,
Not really credit enhancements, but
financing techniques.
but what ended up happening is the governor's office did push back that that there is a provision in the California Constitution that bond money needs to go for single purpose. So it can be used technically if the law had been structured this way solely for operating or solely for services or solely for capital, but it couldn't include all three.
Right.
So that's my recollection of the negotiating and taking out those other two.
Or Nielsen.
It is important, though, you know, our mission here, these committees are also oversight. And oversight means accountability. And that's one of the issues I have with agencies or entities being able to go ahead and be exempted from the administrative law process and just being able to go ahead and put forth regulations without, or in effect, just administratively do things, make changes. That gets us into big problems when we're spending multi-millions of dollars. So I have issues with that, and that's not your fault. That's the fault of the legislature. So I'm the conscience of that around this place. Ms. Riggs and Ms. Gutton, you were talking about the issues of women and in the military. That's a big issue for our Veterans Committee. And if you have some ideas about that, Mr. Teasdale here is our consultant, and would appreciate you bringing those specific issues that may come to your attention. I am no expert, obviously, in that, but I believe that there are some issues unique to female veterans, and we would like to be apprised of that so we kind of focus on it. And in addition, another area, because it's an area I'm very knowledgeable in, is longtime chairman of the California Board of Prison Terms, incarcerated veterans, and veterans who are leaving prison and reintegrating into society. So our Veterans Committee, those are a couple of the areas that we're paying a lot of attention to this year. And if you have thoughts and ideas, we'd welcome your help on those, okay?
11,000.
Yep, we've got a lot of them, for sure. Anyway, that's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I'll allow the Assemblyman if he has any questions.
Thank you, Mr.
Assemblyman.
Chair. Just kind of point of clarifications, just to sum up what I've been hearing to make sure that we're all on the same page. Question for Ms. Riggs, Acting Director. You've touched on our ability to leverage Prop 41 guidelines addressing awarding of points, to leverage the public funding and other nonprofit funding sources. So I appreciate you touching on that. But when you weigh the scoring or the points for the different areas or the different funding sources, are they weighed equally? Like, for example, is a VASH grant going to be weighted equally as a Prop 63 grant? And let's say the Prop 63 grant is a multi-year versus one time. Are they weighted equally?
Yeah, it really is a demonstration that you have in place the ability to have the ongoing operations and service support. And so, so in terms of what that source is, there's no differentiation in terms of the scoring.
There's no differentiation. Okay. So let me ask you another question then. Does this Treasurer low-income housing tax credit program give priority to nonprofit housing projects that contain Prop 63 funding?
Can answer that. They give priority for 9% tax credit applications. If you're applying as a homeless assistance project, then you get priority if you demonstrate that you have certain types of funding, and VHHP is one of them. But it's equally weighted with, say, like MHP supportive housing or other types of state or federal financing. Yeah.
You get a boost because it's for homeless projects.
And what's the state? What's the interest of the state to do that?
Just kind of going back from TCAC's presentation, it's to align state and federal interests in terms of tax credits as well as state department financing and make sure that they're kind of on the same page to say that these programs were designed to target this population, and TCAC wanted to recognize that.
Thank you. Okay, so we talked about the first NOVA for Proposition 41, and we kind of came under the funding appropriation. We weren't able to hit the 75, and there was issues relating to flexibility, to service dollars. But how many of those that were granted or awarded came in with Prop 63 funding?
So we had 3 projects total that came in with MHSA funding. My understanding is that one has now taken that funding out, and the other 2 are considering whether the units would actually be segregated from, so that they wouldn't be layered on top of the VHHP. They would be within the same project, but not layered on top of each other. So you might have some MHSA and VHHP in a single project, but not in a single unit.
And I spoke to that earlier about the double regulating units. What the feedback was that we got from the counties is if we have a unit that is regulated for mental health, we don't want to then overlay vet only on top of that, because that mental health unit is important to that county or that jurisdiction, and they want to be able to serve anybody that has mental health issues. They don't want to limit to mental health vets. And so they're okay with serving vets, they're okay with maybe giving a priority to vets, but they want to be able to have the flexibility to serve their needs of their community. And so that regulating on top of regulating, we heard back from the communities that they didn't like that, but perhaps that they could have various types of units within a single development. So they can have veterans housing units that are regulated for veterans. They could have mental health units, which would serve all folks with mental health, including those with veterans. They thought that that would give them more flexibility.
And I think the inverse is also true in terms of, you know, overlaying the MHSA on the vet units, you know, that it will limit the types of veterans that can be served. And so things like substance abuse and, you know, other underlying conditions won't fit within the MHSA requirements. And so therefore we're, you know, more narrowly targeting, you know, who could even, the veterans that we could serve in the program by layering the two.
From an advocate's point of view, we do have 8 out of 360 of our units are MHSA funded. They're veteran specific. It isn't a problem in a high needs location like San Francisco or Los Angeles. There are many more MHSA eligible clients out there than there are slots, case management slots for the full service partnerships. So we were able to get the MHSA funding in there for just 8 out of 76 units, though we had to go out and find the vets and agree to do the case management until a slot opened up on the full service partnership caseload. Bring this back a little further, we feel, and I think a lot of other veteran service agencies feel, that veterans were not adequately represented in the development of MHSA, and that veterans are not adequately served under it. I would really like to see numbers of how many veterans are actually served through the program.
Are you talking about the county program or the MHSA housing program?
Well,
Because there's a difference.
yeah, well, we had Capital, we had MHSA Capital, so.
And we did not collect that data on the front end of how many veterans were being served. And so I think we started asking in January. And so I have some data that I could share with you offline since then, since we started collecting that data. But that was one of the issues on the front end, is that we weren't collecting that data.
Right, and I understand that the collection of data is very difficult because of Prop 63 moving straight to the county local level. But getting me back to the numbers of those in the first round of the NOVA relating to Prop 41 allocations, you said how many grantees?
There were 3 projects that initially came in with MHSA as a part of their funding,
And one has withdrawn?
and one has since removed MHSA from the project, and
How many grantees overall?
17.
Out of 17, one. So what are we doing to improve that? In light of the fact that we seem to understand that the focus with Prop 63 was for all, but in all, there was a big pitch to the people of California that veterans were a key area for us to provide resource and support. So 1 out of 17 grantees to me doesn't seem like it's kind of, you know, hitting the marker. For me as a representative, as much as I hear in my district, that what are we doing for our veterans? What are we doing for our homelessness? And the fact that it's almost it's more than 50% in my area, those homeless folks that are veterans or veterans that are homeless, is so significant that people are saying we need to do more there. So to me, that's why I've been interested in, one, being invited to this committee hearing and to get these answers. Since it's been 1 in the first round out of 17, what are we doing to attract more than just 1 being able to qualify?
To clarify, there were 3 projects that initially came in with MHSA, and 1 has since removed MHSA as a funding source. So there were actually 3 that came in initially.
I think it's all hopefully going to change, actually, with our No Place Like Home initiative in the Senate, where we're going to propose that there be a specific housing program of the MHSA funds set aside essentially for housing that we have for homeless. And then we're going to have to draft that legislation. I think when it comes to how it relates to this veterans housing program, we're going to have to figure out how to merge or to make the programs complementary. So that's an area we have on our to-do list, if you want to say it that way. We have to kind of work that out. But essentially, we want to develop a maximization of the Prop 63 funds for housing. It's clear we need to provide more housing if we're ever going to deal with the homeless issue, whether it's veterans or not veterans. So we're going to have to focus on increasing the supply of housing to get people off the streets. Because if we don't, we end up paying that 110 grand in the state prison system. I mean, that's kind of, you know, where a lot of them go, you know, not all of them, of course, but a lot of them. So that's something we're going to have to do something about. The Senate leadership is working very diligently on that. We want to work with our assembly members, our sort of housing oriented assembly members by Assemblymember Hernandez is one of our strongest advocates in this area. Okay.
Can I get some clarity? Because I hear two MHSA specifically for housing, i.e. MHSA for capital, and what I hear the Assemblyman talking about is MHSA for services. And so I want to make sure that I'm
No,
understanding.
he's talking about, MHSA is right now a program that was originally proposed for services, and then there was these boards created in each county, and there's a statewide commission, which I'm a member of, for representing the state Senate. And most of the money basically goes to the counties, okay, under the Prop 63. So that money is used for various purposes. What the actual effect is Leon correctly pointed out, a lot of that in the end game is not used for veterans, specifically with mental health problems. Okay, and I think the issue is how to direct more of that to what we see as a crisis, a change since Prop 63 was passed. You know, Prop 63 was passed many years ago. Now our situation has grown in terms of homelessness, and the issue has become more urgent to provide more information and knowledge about solving that problem as a direct way of dealing with mental health issues and homelessness. So that's why there's an initiative, and I think there's been discussions in the Assembly. It's kind of almost a parallel, everybody's talking about it, to repurpose the funds for Prop 63 to be oriented towards directly dealing with this particular population that's homeless, that has mental health problems. And so that's what the proposal that is coming forward will do. And I think it relates to not only the housing part, but the issues that Assembly member is raising on services, because you can't have the housing without the services. You got to have a full service partnership with the housing in order to be successful.
May I also, we're doing a project right now that
So we're working on that in the Senate, and we're working with our colleagues in the Assembly on that.
one of the other issues to consider as you revamp the program in consideration is, again, we're running into the problem with MHSA being capital dollars versus also operating. And I think you've
Yeah.
heard it here.
Yeah.
It's we need the operating subsidy and the
Well,
social
we get
service
it,
subsidy.
we get that.
And currently, under the current structure, the project we're working on in Stockton, it's 11 units. We're getting $1 million for capital, but $200,000 for operating. The operating deficit is $1.5 million. So we have to find other money to bring in to support the operating deficit. And that doesn't include the social service piece, because the county wraparound piece is doing the social service. So there remains a large gap between the operating side. And so that's why it's so hard to pair, because you're left with gaps all over the place. And when you're bringing all these pieces together, all you have are gaps to fill. So again, if we could look broadly in this flexibility.
We're going to continue to work on this. This is not something we're going to solve today. I wanted to personally thank everybody for this very in-depth conversation, including our colleagues in the Senate and additional Assemblymember Hernandez from the Assembly, who's been fiercely dedicated to this subject. And we want to continue the discussion as we work through our housing needs. If it's the pleasure of my co-chair of this, I will adjourn this hearing.